Good morning, fathers of daughters. Welcome to another live stream. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This is Ephraim B. Martin, and welcome to Grow Dad YouTube channel. All fathers are welcome, regardless of your ethnic group, background, and or culture. Mi amigos, bienvenidos. ¿Cómo te sientes? Hoy, en aquí. Gracias. All right, fathers, we are here for another live stream. And I'd like to welcome all fathers. Getting in the fall here in Denver, Colorado. And weather's starting to change. It's still a little warm, though. You know, Colorado's great climate. And, it's changing a little bit. By November, it started getting cold. But right now, it's still pretty warm. And it's nice. So I'm enjoying the rest of, I guess we're getting in the fall. You never know with Colorado. It's kind of crazy. Anyway, fathers, I welcome and would like to just welcome you. So welcome, fathers. Today's fathers, what we're going to be talking about are the 3 stages of development of our daughters. And I've written a book, self-published a book, rather. It's called Daddy's Girls. It's available at Amazon.com. You can get it in the description of my live stream and also through my YouTube channel. And the reason that I wrote the book, I wrote it and had it self-published in February of 2020, is because I felt it is a blueprint to help fathers understand our sense of urgency that we must have with our baby girls, birth to 18 years of age. And it's a very simple read. It's about 34 pages long. I didn't use any data or statistics for that purpose, and very informative, can help all fathers, regardless of your ethnic group, background, and or culture, understand our sense of urgency and what it takes to build long-term sustainable relationships with our baby girls. Now, in my book, I don't tell fathers how to raise their daughters. I'm not interested in that. What I do share is what's coming, though. I have 4 amazing daughters, 36, adult women, 36, 30, 26, and 24. So I've been through every stage of development with them. My daughters are amazing women, grown women, all living their best lives, professional women doing their thing. So I'm honored. I'm blessed by the grace of God to have 4 amazing women in my life. They are the best thing that has ever happened to me. So I just decided to share my experience of raising 4 adult daughters with other fathers who may be struggling. I worked in the criminal justice system for 20 years professionally. I'm a former state of Colorado juvenile probation officer. I've been a certified paralegal since 1984. Also worked in K-12 education. I'm a former teacher, restorative justice coordinator, and dean of students for 10 years, for an entire decade, y'all. So I've got 30 years of experience, professional experience of working directly with all children from all socioeconomic backgrounds and or cultures and their parents. So I know what I learned a little something along the way, father. So I believe I know what I'm talking about here. And my YouTube channel is for girl dads, for fathers of daughters. This is my way of giving back to all fathers who may be struggling, who may be needing answers with their daughters, who may be needing insight, a different perspective. That's what Grow Dad YouTube channel is all about, fathers. I'm here for education, information through instruction. All of my videos are fair use. Feel free, fathers, to subscribe, like, share my videos. I don't care who uses my videos. I don't care if you do a reaction video. I don't care how you use them. As long as the information is getting out, this is what I'm all about. This is how I get down. Like I said, once again, this is my way of giving back to all fathers. Okay? So, fathers, when we talk about the 3 stages of development, I've broken them down in my book. The 3 stages that I cover are birth to 10 years of age, 11 to 13 years of age, and 14 to 18 years of age. My book is complimentary of my videos and my live streams. So feel free to purchase my book. My live streams and my videos are free. My book is detailed. It will make a lot more sense when you look at my videos after reading my book and vice versa. Because like I said, they are complementary of each other. I would not have done it any other way. I feel honored having this YouTube channel because my YouTube channel, I believe, is going to help fathers. I'm going to eventually reach my audience of men, right? I am building my YouTube channel 100% organically. I won't do it any other way. I feel great about it, actually. I've been live streaming since July of 2023. What's today? Today is my 80th live stream. So I have been grinding since July of 2023, feeling great about it. Not good, great, because I know what I can bring to fathers. There's not a lot of YouTube channels on YouTube that's doing what I'm doing. Yes, there are YouTube channels that are addressing fatherhood. Yes, there are YouTube channels that are addressing fathers of daughters, but I get to go a lot deeper because I've been through every stage of development. The YouTube channels that I come across when it comes to fathers of daughters, they're all under 10 years old. And if they do have teenagers, they can't go as deep as I go. They're not able to explain what I'm able to explain. So I'm not knocking those YouTube channels. What I'm saying is I'm a niche. So I know that there's an audience of men that need me and are waiting for me. They just have to find me. So like I said, if you come across my videos and they're helpful, feel free to subscribe, like, share them with family, friends. I can help women as well, mothers of daughters, okay, mothers of sons. So that's why I'm here. I have one hell of a professional background, 30 years. 30 years I've worked with children. So, all right, fathers, the 3 stages of development. I have some excellent videos today. It's going to cover the 3 stages of development. I've already talked about the 3 stages of development in earlier videos. They're anywhere, I believe, between 7 to 10 minutes when I first started live streaming back in 2023. So feel free to look at those individual videos as well. I've grown a lot since then. YouTube has been very, very challenging, but very, very rewarding. Everything from just recording. I feel 100% comfortable in front of the camera because in my professional experience, I spent a lot of time in family court and juvenile court. So I had to report to judges and magistrates on a weekly basis, sometimes on a daily basis, depending on if some of my kids ended up in juvenile detention centers. I'd have to be prepared to give information to the courts on their standing and what they've been doing. I've written hundreds of pre-sentence investigation reports. They're called a PSI on behalf of juveniles, making recommendations to the courts. I've worked with all juvenile justice agencies, anywhere from group homes to diversion programs to placement centers, everything in between, y'all. So I've learned a lot. I've got a great experience. And like I said, I'm at a different transition in my life. So I'm going to share with fathers because one of my goals is to help fathers understand, like I said, sense of urgency. And this is just my way of giving back. I just have one hell of a skill set. So I have no problem sharing because I believe when God blesses you with gifts, if you do not use them, he will take them away. I've been blessed my entire life. Lord knows I've been blessed my entire life. So if I can help fathers that are available, that need help, that need answers, that need resources, I'm in. I'm all about solutions, y'all. Okay, fathers. So let's take a look at these videos. I got about 5 videos, I think. And very good. And I'm just going to run them back to back to back to back for you. I'm not going to do much commentating like I normally do on my videos. And I just want to run them back to back to back. And they're very, very informative. The 3 stages of development of our daughters. Like I said, in my book, Daddy's Girls, I've broken it down. Birth to 10 years of age, 11 to 13 years of age, and 14 to 18 years of age. Those are what I consider the 3 stages of development. With each stage, it's going to have its challenges, but it's also going to have its rewards, fathers of daughters. So with that being said, I need your attention, right? I need you to process. I need you to be open-minded. And I need you to be objective, okay? Raising our daughters requires us to be analytical in a lot of different phases of their lives. It requires adjustments, fathers of daughters. It requires validation. It requires a lot from us because our plates are going to be full. But we have tools, fathers. From when they're birth into this world, we have the tools. We have the understanding. We just have to put our best foot forward, be consistent in their life, and God's going to bless us. I can promise you. I've never had a problem with any of my baby girls. My daughters are actually pretty easy to rear. They were, because I was there birth to 18. So didn't have any issues with my baby girls. And when I tell people that, a lot of people are very, very surprised. But if you put in the work and you're consistent, I can promise you the relationship, the long-term relationship you build with your baby girls, it's going to be in place because they're going to fall in line because we are their first love. They are looking to us for their guidance and our leadership. We bring protection and safety in our daughters' lives, fathers. All right, fathers, let's get in these videos, all right? Welcome.
Now for the Big Mama developmental milestones, also called stages of development. These are a list of skills that most children can do by a certain age, including physical motor skills, language, as well as social cognitive skills. Now, it's not just another list to memorize here. This is actually very crucial for a child's future. So let me explain. If a child does not meet their key developmental milestones for their age, it can indicate a delay in development and could result in severe disablement if not caught early and addressed early. This is why it's so very important for you, the nurse, to identify children who do not meet these developmental milestones and to report it to the HCP immediately. So that being said, I know there's a lot here, but I'm going to highlight some very critical areas that the NCLEX focuses on. And it's usually between 2 months and the 2-year mark. So first on the list here is age 1 month. The gross motor skill is head lag. They have very poor head control. And the fine motor skills that they're developing is the grasp reflex, 0 to 3 months, the Babinski reflex, 0 to 12 months, the rooting reflex, 0 to 4 months, and the tonic neck reflex, 0 to 4 months, which we cover more in full detail in the physical exam lecture. Now, language that they're learning is responding to touch and voices, as well as sensory motor communication. And as far as social cognitive, they often find safety with caregivers and looks at the faces of their caregivers. Now, age 2 to 3 months, a huge NCLEX tip to write down is the gross motor skill of kicking their legs. So the memory trick to write down is 2 legs are being kicked at 2 months of age, and raising their head when prone, as well as less head lag. Now, the fine motor skill is the grasp reflex often diminishes between this age. And the language that they're developing is responding to sound, as well as they're able to make sounds with their mouth. And for social cognitive, they always show smiles and coos when seeing a familiar face. Big NCLEX tip. So the memory trick, smiles at the 2nd month. Now, for 4 to 5 months old, the gross motor skill that is to be seen is no more head lag. So we always report if head lag is seen after 4 months. Huge NCLEX tip. Be sure to write that down. So the memory trick, just think after month 4, head lag no more. Now, the NCLEX and most nursing exams refer to this as infant's head stays behind the shoulders when raised from supine to sitting position. This is what they mean by head lag. So once again, infant's head stays behind the shoulders when raised from supine to sitting position. So be sure to know these key terms here. And another gross motor skill is at 5 months, they can roll from front to back, as mentioned by Kaplan and ATI. Now, for the fine motor skills, a big one on the HESI was grabbing objects voluntarily. For example, this age group grabs a rattle. Now, we also see the diminishing of the moral reflex, also called the startle reflex, as well as other reflexes. And for language, they often mimic sounds that are heard, and they're able to change their cry tone for different needs. Now, for social cognitive, they're often soothed by caregivers' voices and copies the expression of caregivers and other people they're around. And they often cry when they don't get their way. So moving on to 6 to 9 months. A big thing to write down is birth weight doubles at 6 months. Huge NCLEX tip. I'll say it like 5 times for you guys. Birth weight doubles at 6 months. Okay, maybe only 2 times. So be sure to write that down. Also, 6 to 9 months, they can roll from their back to front and can sit up unsupported and can pull self up. So, a real big safety concern is removing musical mobiles from the crib because these infants can pull themselves up and strangle themselves with those musical mobile strings. Now, for fine motor skills, 6 months old can hold a big bottle. And at 7 months, they can transfer objects from one hand to the other. And for language, a really big one here is they can babble words or babbling words, as mentioned by ATI. For example, mama and dada. And this age group can often respond to their own name. Now, a big one again to write down is not babbling at 9 months. We must report it. Huge, huge, huge. So be sure to write that down. If the child is not babbling at 9 months, we must report it to the provider. And for cognitive and social skills, they can identify faces and strangers. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to take your quiz and download the study guides. And also feel free to share the love, share with a classmate, and even your instructor. See you guys in the next videos.
My name's Frances Jensen, and I work at the University of Pennsylvania as the chair of neurology at the Perelman School of Medicine. The teenage brain is different from the adult brain in several ways, but two major patterns come out. First of all, because children and teenagers are actually wired to learn faster than adults, their synapses, where the brain cells talk to one another, are actually at higher numbers in childhood and adolescence. So teenagers actually have more synapses than adults. They also have more of the ability to learn, to strengthen those synapses than adults. We call that synaptic plasticity, how brain cells respond to they can be molded by the environment. That actually increased excitability of their brains is a very good thing. The second way the teenage brain is very different is that the way our brain areas are hooked up to one another, the major brain regions, is a process that takes 2.5 decades of our lives to actually occur. The brain is the last organ in the body to mature, and therefore it takes until your mid to late 20s to finish. And that property that takes a very long time, one of the major properties is the way we connect brain regions up to one another. So it's called myelination, and it starts in the back of your brain and moves forward. So the last place to connect is the frontal lobe. Frontal lobe is important for judgment, impulse control, decision-making, and empathy. So when we think of teenagers, one of the problems they have is that they're not really accessing their frontal lobe as fast as they could. Teen brains are very impressionable to good things, but also to bad things. And one of the important things that I think teenagers need to know about themselves is this hidden strength is a bit of a double-edged sword in that addiction is a form of synaptic plasticity too. Instead of learning a good thing, your brain is actually learning a bad thing, which is substance abuse, and one gets the same strengthening of the wrong synapses robustly more than in the adults. So actually teenagers can get addicted harder, stronger, longer, faster than the adult. You couple that with the fact they're risk takers, they're actually potentially putting themselves in harm's way more. But it's not just the process of getting addicted. Actually, some of these substances prevent the normal process, the good things happening in your brain, and can change the way your brain develops. People who are addicted early have a much harder time undoing that addiction later in life. There are other things, though, like stress, that can affect your brain in the adolescent years and can have long-term effects on later adult development, such as increasing the risk of depression. I find when we explain some of the new research on the teenage brain to parents and teachers, there's a sense of, so that's why they did it. Oh, now I get it.
The teenage brain during puberty explained. Being a teenager is hard, especially when rapid and confusing changes wreak havoc on the teenage body and brain. 20 years ago, science assumed that all the volatile emotions that came with puberty were due to brand new hormones racing through the body. Today, however, we know that the teenage brain undergoes massive neurological changes during puberty. With a better understanding of what's happening in our teen's brain and how it affects behavior, many believe that hormones are the culprit for wild behavior and emotional outbursts. But the fact is, there's a lot more going on than we originally assumed. The tween brain is like an extremely absorbent sponge, dedicated to learning absolutely everything it can about the world they live in and the people in it. Their brains rapidly develop on a cellular level, making connections with neurons called synapses as their brain forms, learns, and develops. Between the ages of 11 and 17, the teenage brain undergoes a phenomenon during sleep that's integral to their maturation. In a process called synaptic pruning, the frontal cortex decides which neural connections to keep and which to discard. Think of it like spring cleaning for the mind. Those often use connections, like their crush's phone number, and cheat codes for their favorite video game are retained, while inconsequential memories, like remembering to make their beds, can fade into obscurity. This happens through myelination, a process where a specific neural connection in the brain is coated with an electrically conductive fatty substance called myelin. Myelin allows faster recall and better access to memory. Scientists believe that this is the reason why teens naturally understand, learn, and adapt to new technologies and information with relative ease. Teens and parents should take advantage of this critical window of neuroplasticity by encouraging and supporting your teen's interests. If your teen wants to learn an instrument, new sport, or language, for instance, we should encourage further development of their strengths and passions during this pruning phase. Alongside these changes, you may also identify your tween and teen engaging in risky and dangerous activities, which may lead you to believe that your child is becoming defiant, reckless, or irresponsible. This is due to the pruning of the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that's responsible for risk assessment and planning. While the prefrontal cortex is under renovation, the teen's brain ability to analyze risk, dangers, and consequences appropriately is underdeveloped and limits their ability to stop themselves from acting on their risky impulses. Instead of trying to control your teen, you can encourage them to take positive risks. Examples of positive risks include giving your child the freedom to walk or catch the bus home from school, or go to a party unchaperoned with friends. Doing so will allow teens to learn consequence, assert independence, develop their identity, problem solve, and grow insight. Positive risks and experiences are critical for healthy development. Next on the list, and personally my favorite and biggest challenge, are moodiness and emotional outbursts. There are a multitude of hormones that the brain produces and releases during puberty, all of which contribute to the healthy functioning and regulation of the body. One of these hormones is called allopregnolone, which is released into the bloodstream to help us calm down when we experience stress. Scientists have found that this hormone has the opposite effect on teens during puberty. Instead of its intended calming effect, the hormone induces heightened levels of anxiety. This means that even low-level stress can render your teenager overwhelmed, anxious, panicked, or depressed. As part of this process, teen brains are learning to identify and differentiate complex emotions and facial expressions. This can often result in teens misinterpreting your face, thoughts, and emotions, causing them to lash out and have an emotional outburst. Again, this isn't personal. They're just trying to process and develop these critical interpersonal skills, and we need to understand that they aren't going to necessarily interpret things the way you intend to. We should aim to approach adolescence armed with knowledge of the changes occurring in a teen's developing brains and bodies, and how those changes are displayed in common teen behavior. This will help us to practice compassion, patience, and kindness, and better equip parents to support their teen during these emotionally charged, turbulent times. If you've enjoyed this video or learned something new, please give us a like and let us know in the comments if you've had any success deciphering the teenage mind. If you know any parents that would benefit from this video, please share and click that subscribe button below to stay notified when our regular parenting videos are uploaded. See you next time.
The frontal cortex doesn't fully. The human brain, specifically the frontal cortex, doesn't fully develop until 25 years of age. That means true adulthood doesn't begin at 18 or 21, but 25 years old. What we're going to do in this video is discuss the anatomy of the frontal cortex, its various functions, and see why humans are so slow to develop. On top of all this, we're going to see why injuries to the frontal cortex are so scary. Let's do this. Let's start by figuring out where in the brain the frontal cortex is. What I have in front of you is the right hemisphere of a human brain. Now, there's a ton of structures noticeable, but the thing you're probably drawn to first is all this highly coiled surface. This is the cortex of the brain. Cortex is just Greek for bark, as in the bark of a tree. Just think of it as the outermost layer of the brain. These raised areas that you can see here, which I usually say are like mountains, are called gyri. And then these depressions, which again, I pretty much describe as valleys to those gyri mountains, these are called sulci or sulci. And what this does is it allows for a lot of surface area to be coiled and folded into a smaller area. The body does this quite frequently. You'll see something very similar in the digestive system, for instance. But on average, there's about 2 square feet of brain surface area all coiled into your cranial cavity. If we take a look at this side of the brain, you're going to see a noticeable difference between these two areas. This gray area that kind of goes all the way around is what's called gray matter. And this is where neurons are synapsing with one another and will just communicating with each other. The white area is called white matter. And white matter is made up of these really specialized cells called glial cells. And what they do is wrap around the tails of the neurons, speeding up their impulse and reinforcing commonly used pathways. Let's go ahead and take a look at the top of the brain. And you're going to see this really long sulcus that's going to descend all the way down to here. And we call this sulcus the central sulcus. And it's going to separate this frontal lobe from this parietal lobe, which is on the top back aspect of the brain. Then on the side here, you're going to see another sulcus called the lateral sulcus. And this is going to separate this frontal lobe from this lobe on the side called the temporal lobe. This entire area right here, including the gray and the white matter, is going to be called the frontal lobe. The frontal cortex is simply the gray matter that's on the top of the frontal lobe. This is what we're going to be talking about today. Now, the frontal cortex is responsible for a lot of different functions, including motor control and what are described as executive functions, which are things like planning ahead, postponing gratification, problem solving, and focusing your attention. The thing is, the entire frontal cortex doesn't perform all of these functions. Instead, there are little subregions, each of which is in charge of its own part of your consciousness. At the same time, it's not as though these areas have a strict border either. It's not like you have a sign that says, you are now entering the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. It's just not that simple. This is why I'm not going to be getting extremely specific in this video. I'm just going to be going over the generally accepted areas and overall functions. In a future video, I'm going to be getting much more specific, and we'll go into things such as the Brodmann areas. But for now, we're just going to give you an overall idea of what these areas do. Now, I'm often asked, how do we know that a specific area of the brain is responsible for certain actions and behaviors? And it comes down to a combination of neural imaging, animal studies, and psychological studies. We literally look and see which area of the brain is experiencing the most blood flow and metabolism as you're performing physical and mental activities. And then if someone experiences a trauma to the brain, sometimes it'll shut an entire region off. And that gives us a glimpse into its function by simply comparing the behavior before and after the trauma. But we still have a ton of work to do. Now, let's start with this region here called the motor cortex. And there are several different subregions inside of this motor cortex, such as the primary motor cortex, located right here. We have the premotor cortex in this area. And then we have the supplementary motor area up in here. But for our purposes, we're just going to include them all together and call them the motor cortex. My main reason for doing this is because some of these areas are still not fully understood, such as the supplementary motor area and the premotor cortex. And they have significant overlap in their function with the primary motor cortex. So for now, we're just going to consider it all part of the motor cortex. This is where motor control for all of your skeletal muscles is going to originate. Some of you may have seen that distorted picture called a homunculus or body map. This is showing you how much real estate a body part has on the motor cortex. So an easy example of this is the hand and the elbow. The hand is going to have a ton more real estate because it has a lot of dexterity and movement to it, while the elbow is going to have considerably less because all it's going to be performing is flexion and extension. The more precision required, the more real estate you are going to have on that motor cortex. Now, this area here in front of that motor cortex is called the prefrontal cortex. Now, I apologize for this area here. Someone was a little rough with the brain, and so it experienced some damage. But this prefrontal cortex, in my opinion, is the most interesting aspect of the entire brain. It's the most recently evolved, it's the slowest to develop, and it's absolutely gigantic in human beings. Let's start with this area of the prefrontal cortex called the anterior cingulate cortex. Now, from numerous studies, which include both humans and animals, this area seems to be responsible for vicarious experience, or what most would call empathy. In one study, participants underwent an fMRI and then experienced a painful stimulus. And what happened was their anterior cingulate cortex lit up. But in that same study, participants had their partner in the same room as them, and what happened is they were shown a cue that their partner had just experienced a painful stimulus. And guess what? The anterior cingulate cortex also lit up. What's also fascinating is the anterior cingulate cortex also lights up when individuals are experiencing vicarious rewards, which is when someone else is experiencing a reward that you yourself have experienced. Over here, we have the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex. And that, yes, is a mouthful. This area is where an understanding that others have thoughts, desires, intentions, and beliefs comes from. We call this the theory of mind, and it doesn't really manifest until someone is 4 to 5 years old. What that means is a 3-year-old doesn't really understand that other people have different thoughts than their own. They assume that because they know something, everyone else knows something too. Then we have the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is going to come and wrap around like this and come back around. So all of this area here is going to be that ventromedial prefrontal cortex. This region is involved with regulating your emotions, choosing friends that are good for you, and morality or emotional decision making. It works in tandem with a much more ancient structure in the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is part of your limbic system. Now, the amygdala processes what are called negative emotions. If something bad happens to you, you're going to have a strong response from your amygdala. However, how you respond to the situation is very much influenced by this ventromedial prefrontal cortex. There are plenty of fascinating case studies over the years of individuals who experienced trauma to this area, with the most famous being Phineas Gage. He was a railroad worker who experienced an explosion and a metal rod went through his head and destroyed half of his frontal lobe. There are plenty of interesting things about his particular case, but one of the most interesting is in regards to how much his behavior changed after the event. Now, a lot of this is still up for debate. We're not sure how much is true and how much just became exaggerated over time. But as the story goes, before the accident, he was a pretty normal guy. But after the accident, he became very disturbing to your average individual and very, very impulsive. So while this can't be verified since it was so long ago, it's almost as though his emotional responses were coming primarily from the amygdala, since half of his ventromedial prefrontal cortex was destroyed during the accident. Over here, we have the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. We don't have a solid understanding as to what this area does as of yet, but it seems like it has something to do with stopping motor responses if something unanticipated comes into the equation. So, for example, let's say you're on a jog through the park, and as you're approaching a corner, a bike comes out of nowhere, and you have to jump out of the way in order to not get hit. See, originally you were in this rhythm, and your motor responses kind of knew what was coming next. But all of a sudden, something came out of nowhere, and you have to change plans. All of that would have been processed in the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. The last area I want to talk about is this dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And when we say that the brain doesn't fully develop until 25, we're talking about this area specifically. This is where the rational part of you comes from. People frequently describe this as the Vulcan part of you from Star Trek. But let's think about this for a second. If it takes 25 years for your rationality to mature, that explains a lot about children and adolescents. Take this for example. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex allows you to postpone gratification. That essentially means you're willing to sacrifice a reward in the short term in order to get a larger reward in the long term. It's not as though that some kind of switch is flipped when you turn 25 years old. There are people who are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who still struggle with delaying gratification. But they should be much better than your average 5-year-old. As you age, your ability to delay gratification is going to gradually increase. But it makes perfect sense why teenagers aren't really clamoring to build a strong savings account with the money they make as a grocery clerk. They literally don't have the synapses yet to fully process that behavior. An interesting consequence of this, though, is that younger people tend to be more willing to take risks. Now, sure, some of these risks can be extremely foolish. I mean, jumping off the roof onto a trampoline is never a bright idea. But at the same time, if they're more willing to take risks than your average adult, it can open them up to a wide range of opportunities. The risks don't need to be physical risks. They could be career-moving risks or social perception risks. If you look throughout history, individuals under the age of 25 have made some of the biggest contributions to society, whether that's through scientific advancement, social change, or the arts. When you don't have a lot of experience under your belt, it's far more easy to push boundaries. And sure, maybe it doesn't work out. In that case, you'll make a synapse and you'll be far less likely to take that risk again. But if it does work out, you'll see it as less of a risk and you'll be willing to take more similar risks like that, potentially opening your opportunities. The reason it takes 25 years for the brain to fully develop is because we as humans are very social creatures. And social interaction is extremely complicated. It takes a very big brain to navigate all of the complexity that we as humans add to socializing. Now, I want to be very clear. It's not as though each of these regions are solely responsible for a specific action or behavior. They work together so that you can respond properly to a particular situation. But sometimes you need to be more rational, and other times you definitely need to be more emotional. And in those cases, you're going to see more metabolism, more blood flow, just more usage and activity in one of these areas. It's amazing to me to think that we have only scratched the surface when it comes to the brain and its functions. There are so many areas that I had to leave out for the sake of time, but we will definitely be getting far more specific in future videos, so definitely be on the lookout for that. I also want to mention that we have started working with Wizio, which is this amazing platform that allows you to ask Jonathan and myself questions, and we can respond to you with a detailed video response. This is really, really cool, and I'm very excited about it. You'll find a link in the description below. Also, if you're interested in getting some merchandise and looking super snazzy like me, you'll also find merchandise down below the video. But thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.
Okay, fathers, I'm having some technical issues. I'm not sure what happened, but I lost my overlay for my YouTube. I'm not sure what's going on. So just see the outskirts of my my live stream. It's gone. So I'm not sure what happened, but we've only got one more video, so it is all good.
Hi, my name is Adriana Galvan. I'm a professor of psychology and dean of undergraduate education at UCLA, and I'm delighted to deliver this address today. I'll be talking about what we've learned from neuroscience and what it's revealed about adolescent development and brain development. A few decades ago, there was a lot of interest in understanding brain development during the first few years of life. And what we learned is that brain changes during this time support key developmental milestones, including walking or talking or bonding with caregivers. In recent decades, using brain imaging technology and psychological tools, we've also learned that during adolescence, there's another wave of massive brain development. And similar to earlier childhood, changes that occur in the brain during this time support key developmental milestones that are specific to adolescence, and I'll be discussing that in today's talk. The general narrative around adolescence that we see in the media tends to be around the notion that adolescents are impulsive, that they don't make good decisions, and that this is a period of life that we just need to help them get through as quickly as possible. But luckily, based on the research that I'll describe today, the tide is turning. What you're looking at here is an image from a journal article that was a part of a collection in the Nature journal a few years ago, describing all we know about adolescence and calling for researchers and scholars to stop giving adolescents a raw deal, as they say, and to really uplift and promote this time in life as one of opportunity and exploration in ways that are healthy and necessary for development. So along with the massive scientific discovery about the particulars of what occurs in the brain during adolescence, what's been unique about adolescent neuroscience research in the past decade has been the refreshing narrative shift about adolescence. And this allows us to then use what we know from the science and apply it to policy questions that are relevant to young people. What we know is that adolescence is a time of remarkable opportunity. In general, we define adolescence as starting around age 9 or 10 when puberty strikes and going through the mid-20s. And the reason that it's such a long period of development is because it encompasses a lot of psychological, biological, and physical changes. During this time of rapid growth, we discover, we learn from, and we adapt to the world around us. And I just want to note that adolescence, because it spans such a long number of years, it encompasses early adolescence, which is around ages 9 to 12, mid-adolescence, about 13 to 17, and late adolescence, which is about 18 and beyond. And it's important to note that no one factor, whether it's age or grade or pubertal status, defines adolescence completely, but all of those contribute to the experience of adolescence. In today's talk, I'll be providing general findings about what we've learned, but I want to include some caveats and considerations for you to think about as I go through the slides. The first is that there's extensive variability in adolescence. And that's to say that although we speak about adolescent findings generally, all adolescents are obviously not alike. I show this picture to illustrate that although every individual in this picture is the same age and the same grade, they're all 14 and in 8th grade, there are significant observable differences in physical height, for example, in these adolescents. And so you can appreciate that they are experiencing different contexts and different biological stages of puberty. Adolescence has also transformed across successive generations. This image is from a paper published a few years ago now from over 8 million adolescents, and it simply asked adolescents to endorse, yes or no, the following items. Do they have a driver's license? Have they tried alcohol? Do they date? Do they work for pay? And what you'll notice is in the first 3 items listed, the endorsement rate was about 85 to 90% in the mid-70s, and that lasted through about the early 90s. But in the mid-90s, you'll notice a significant drop-off in the number of adolescents who were endorsing that they drove, that they tried alcohol, and that they dated. And there are many reasons why there might be a decline in what was typically considered characteristic adolescent behaviors. One explanation has been that the uptick in social media use has given adolescents the opportunity to engage with peers in different ways, and maybe that's what contributes to these changes. But nonetheless, it's important to think about how and whether we can compare adolescents across different generations, given the different contexts in developmental activities. And the last caveat that I'll mention is localization. The research I'll be talking about today comes from Western countries. 25% of the world's population is between the ages of 10 and 24. And 9/10 of those adolescents live in low and middle income countries. And yet 90% of current data about adolescents comes from high income countries. So that's important to keep in mind about generalizability of these data. Why is the neuroscience of adolescence important? I'll first highlight that point and then discuss what we've learned and then some potential implications for policy. A lot happens during adolescence, as we all know. Adolescents experience a range of physical, social, emotional, and behavioral changes. Not all at the same time necessarily, but they certainly overlap. And they contribute to the experience adolescents have. Relationships expand to include new people. And this is important because how the brain changes in brain regions that support social processing, emotional monitoring, all of that contributes to the ability to form new social relationships outside the family or close caregiving group. This also contributes to adolescents' need to develop autonomy. It contributes to adolescents learning to make decisions on their own. And part of that is supported by changes that occur in the prefrontal cortex that I'll describe later. And finally, identity exploration and community engagement are quite high during adolescence because of their new interest in peers or uptick in interest in peers. They're more likely to engage with their community, to start being involved in causes that they believe in, to be activists for causes that they believe in. And all of that contributes to their own identity exploration in myriad ways. We've learned quite a bit about adolescents and their psychology, but today I'll describe how the developing brains of adolescents are built for the changes that I just described. In other words, the changes that we observe are supported by particular maturation in key neural circuits. One thing we've learned is that there's greater plasticity during adolescence than later in life. And this means that there's increased sensitivity to the environment. Coming back to the example of early postnatal life, there's a lot of plasticity then too, as young infants learn to pay particular attention to phonemes, for example, in their native language. And this is supported by the great plasticity in the brain that allows them to incorporate environmental input into their own development. The same thing happens during adolescence. Of course, adolescents are no longer language learning their native language, but they are learning how to interact with the environment. And so their brain is primed to be sensitive to these environmental inputs. Neural connections become more efficient. What this means is that brain regions that communicate with each other to support the task at hand become more efficient over time if they're used frequently. So for example, connections between the amygdala, a brain region involved in emotion processing and emotion regulation, has strong connections with the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in emotion regulation. And so over time, the connections between these regions become more refined. Our motivation and reward systems are more active in adolescence than in younger childhood and adulthood. And what this means is that adolescents derive greater engagement of the mesolimbic circuitry when they experience something valuable or pleasurable. And this contributes to motivation to seek out novelty, new relationships, and new adventures. And finally, adolescents are uniquely skilled and interested in exploring their environment. Along with this, they need to be flexible in their learning from the environment. And they evince quite a bit of flexibility in learning from missteps or learning new tasks. It's the reason why we don't teach more complex, for example, math skills or writing or reading skills earlier in life, because the adolescent brain is primed and ready to accept this type of learning. So I'll go into a few specifics about some key findings. One is that the adolescent brain is in a constant state of flux and activity. And the reason for this is because it grows in response to the environment. And so the dynamic nature of adolescent brain development serves a purpose. And that purpose is to help adolescents become more cognitively mature. As I mentioned before, we know that brain regions do not work in isolation. So for example, the amygdala does not work in isolation. It works in concert with the hippocampus, for example, for emotional learning. It works in concert with the prefrontal cortex for emotion regulation. The picture you're looking at on the right illustrates the many pathways that exist throughout the brain, showing that brain regions, even if they are not physically close in proximity, nonetheless can have strong communication. And this happens because of the functional network that developed during the adolescent years. We know that large-scale brain networks dynamically integrate with each other. Back to that example of the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. We also know that brain systems also tend to segregate from one another if they no longer serve a particular purpose. During childhood and adolescence, functional modules become more distinct, and connectivity within modules increases. And that's kind of a lot to conceptualize, just reading it here, hearing my words. So I'm showing you a picture on the right that demonstrates what this means. So here what you're looking at is a picture towards the bottom of a representative youth brain, showing that the connections between different modules, or the different colors, the connections are rather weak, illustrated with the dotted lines. But across development, these connections become stronger, as shown in the adult brain representation, where now you see the solid lines. And those solid lines and the thicker lines are meant to represent the stronger connections within the modules that are a different color, and then also between modules. And together, this refinement is what helps bolster attention networks, the default mode networks, cognitive networks, all the networks that are really critical for adolescents to have as they transition into adulthood. We've also learned a lot about, or there have been a lot of studies about how puberty influences brain development. So early in the talk, I mentioned that adolescence is jump-started at the onset of puberty. And what we can say is that puberty and brain development undoubtedly exert bidirectional influence on one another. So when puberty begins and there's a release of hormones, those hormones have implications for the structure and function of particular brain regions. And conversely, when brain changes occur, they help instigate this process of pubertal development and hormone release. There are a lot of studies on this topic, and the data are still rather mixed. But one thing that we do know is described in a paper by Jen Pfeiffer's group a few years ago, is that the majority of findings show a negative relationship between puberty and gray matter, or cortical thickness. What that means is that as individuals show greater pubertal stages or pubertal maturation and an increase in pubertal hormones, there's a decrease in cortical thickness. And this is important because cortical thickness, or the converse cortical thinning, is thought to be a marker of neuromaturation. That is, that we have greater cortical thinning as we progress through adolescence. And the picture on the right is showing the general patterns that have been observed. So for example, if you look at the purple arrows, that are pointed downward, that's meant to illustrate that as pubertal stage gets more advanced, there's a decrease in cortical matter in the particular brain region that it's on in this schematic. There are also major neurodevelopmental changes in mesolimbic circuitry, primarily in the striatum and the medial prefrontal cortex. These regions have typically been associated with reward sensitivity and have shown that there's greater activation in these regions when adolescents are presented with something they find valuable or rewarding, also when they are engaged in a risk-taking task. Less emphasis has been paid to how these systems are important for learning. So a few slides ago, I said that flexible learning is important for adolescents to learn to navigate the changing social landscape, the changing cognitive landscape. And greater engagement of these systems of the mesolimbic circuitry helps them become better learners to their environment. A few studies have illustrated this point. So a few years ago, Juliet Davidow and colleagues found that enhanced engagement and enhanced reward sensitivity was actually related to better learning among adolescents as compared to adults. Evelina Krohn's group showed a similar finding, that those adolescents with greater activation of the reward system, and in particular the striatum, showed benefits in learning as compared to adults. And Eva Telzer's group has also shown this in a longitudinal framework, showing that reorganization of learning systems contributes to performance across adolescence. So that bit of information about mesolimbic circuitry has also contributed to our understanding of adolescent decision-making. There's a lot of interest in this topic given the changes that are observed in decision-making and how they relate to policy questions of how we support adolescents as they make these neurodevelopmental changes. This great review by Kate Hartley's group a few years ago illustrates the many factors that influence decision-making across development. So it's not simply the case that adolescents are poor decision-makers as they've been characterized, but in fact that with every decision, they are weighing different factors. The probability of a positive outcome, for example, of engaging in a particular decision, the importance of that decision or the importance of the reward that they are making a decision about, the timing, how important is it for me to make a decision that yields immediate rewards versus delayed rewards. And so they show this cartoon image of what might happen when an adolescent receives a text message when they're driving. And depending on who the person is who's sending the text, how risky they think it is to read the text while they're driving, all of these things factor into their decision making. And that's all to say that adolescents will make different decisions across different contexts as informed by the many different calculations that they're making. And the brain supports these types of calculations. Risk-taking in adolescence has been a topic of great interest to parents, educators, and adolescents themselves, of course, along with scientists. And the reason for this is because there's an increase in risk-taking among adolescents. And indeed, health compromising risks are more likely to be taken by adolescents than any other age group. What we know is that risk-taking varies as a function of affective context. So as I mentioned just previously, adolescents are not always risk takers in every context, and not all adolescents are risk takers. It really depends on their arousal level, who else is in their company, and the type of risk that they are being confronted with. We also know that pubertal hormones are associated with risk-taking, in particular testosterone, and that the dynamics of changes in the frontal systems and the striatum also contribute to risk-taking. So that greater activation of the frontal striatal network is associated with enhanced risk-taking, both in the laboratory and outside of the laboratory. And finally, there are vast individual differences in risk-taking among adolescents. Generally, middle adolescence is when there's an increase in risk-taking behavior, but of course, again, that depends on the task, the risk that's being asked of them. So all of this research and many other research studies that unfortunately I don't have time to get into, including studies on the social brain and social processing during adolescence, as well as digital media and how that's impacting brain development. All of these data have led to some characteristic developmental needs of adolescents that will help us think about how to support adolescents when thinking about policy. So one is that adolescents are going to take risks. That is just a characteristic of this time in life. And in fact, it's necessary to take risks in order to achieve greater developmental milestones. So providing adolescents with safe and satisfying ways to take healthy risks should be a priority. Real-world scenarios in which to build emotional regulation, problem-solving, and decision-making skills is also crucial for adolescents. And providing spaces for them to develop a sense of meaning, of identity, and purpose by contributing to peers, family, and communities is really important. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw a lot of evidence of adolescents mobilizing and finding new ways to connect, given the importance of their connections to peers and family. And this really gives a lot of meaning to the importance of social connections during adolescence. Adolescents are also greatly concerned with social status. In fact, surveys show that one of the reasons that adolescents make the choices that they do is in an effort to gain respect and social status among their peers. And providing ways for them to do so in a positive way is really important. We also need to support values, goals, and personal and group identities of adolescents. And one of the best ways to do this is to not make assumptions about what those values and goals are, but instead to engage adolescents when making decisions about their well-being. And finally, we know that warmth and support from parents and other caring adults continues to be important throughout adolescence. There's an assumption that as adolescents or as children become adolescents, that they show less interest in peers or parents, or care less about their family and care more about their peers. But recent research by Eva Telzer's group and others show that that's absolutely not true. That in fact, they care equally about their parents. It's just that they also elevate input and opinions of their peers. So finally, I'll close by describing some implications or potential implications for policy of this research on adolescent brain development. The first is the need for a developmentally informed approach to policymaking. So these series of studies over a few decades now have first established something that's really important, and that is that the adolescent brain is distinct from a younger brain and from an older brain. And we now know that that seems pretty obvious, but when this work first started, the adolescent brain or adolescents were not treated as a distinct group. And the reason that's important is because we now know that the adolescent brain functions differently than younger children and older adults. And that needs to be taken into consideration when thinking about policies related to driving or adolescent health or the juvenile justice system, for example. We know that one size doesn't fit all, although we generally talk about adolescence generally. The fact that this period of life spans between ages about 10 to 25 means that clearly there are a lot of changes that happen during that time. And so policies that are relevant for late adolescence, for example, may not be as helpful for younger or early adolescents. And so taking into consideration the different developmental stages within adolescence is really important. Perhaps the greatest contribution from adolescent neuroscience research has been on the juvenile justice system. One question that repeatedly arises in these juvenile justice discussions is when adolescence ends. And the reason that's important is because in our country, the age of majority is age 18. And so even though that doesn't align with what we know from the developmental science about the continued development of adolescent psychological and brain development, having that benchmark of 18 could really redirect an adolescent who's been accused or convicted of a crime in very different directions. And so establishing the importance of considering the developmental stage of individuals during this time has been crucial in helping think about how to help and support individuals involved in all different types of systems, and certainly in the juvenile justice system. There's been a lot of interest of late about sleep during adolescence. Contrary to what we used to think, adolescents need just as much sleep as younger children, and yet they get less sleep than children or adults. There are many reasons for this. One of them is biologically driven, that adolescents have a sleep, what's called a sleep phase delay, so they don't feel sleepy until later in the night. Another reason is that there's an increase in technology use, and so that's going to contribute to sleep. And so thinking about ways to encourage sleep and even make adolescents aware of the importance of it for their learning and emotion regulation is really important. And finally, related to the concept of sleep, there have been recent discussions about policies associated with school start times. Knowing that adolescents are more likely to go to bed later and wake up later, there's been conversations about whether school start times are developmentally informed and appropriate. Those are ongoing, although some school systems have started school later for people in middle and high school. This isn't consistent across the country, and whether that needs to be changed will be informed by developmental neuroscience research. So just in conclusion, I just want to underscore the importance of acknowledging that the normative changes that happen during adolescence in the brain and physically and psychologically are indeed normative. Adolescents are bright, full of opportunity, and the exploration that they tend to do towards new activities and desires are really important for reaching developmental milestones. Scientific leaders have called for more nuanced understanding that celebrates these behaviors and helps provide scaffolding that helps adolescents navigate the changing social and cognitive landscapes during this time. So with that, I'd like to thank my lab, collaborators. The Center for the Developing Adolescent, I did mention I'm a co-executive director of that center, and our work is to translate developmental neuroscience research into policy and practice. So thank you.
Okay, fathers. Excellent videos. Excellent videos. And another live stream completed. So, fathers, just want to share that information with you. When I'm doing my research, this was a joy. This one was 3 stages of development, because when I do my research, oh, by the way, all videos that are shown on all my live streams, they're always in the description. So feel free to always do your own research, fathers, right? Let the professionals be the professionals, but all the videos are in the description, and you can learn more and more about the adolescent brain outside of all these professionals. But doing the research that I'm doing to gather for my live streams is just a joy, because I come across so many videos, fathers, and I have to watch all of them. I watch all of them at least twice. Sometimes I watch more than that, but the gathering of research, since we're visual human beings, doing this through video, you see how it's going to encourage you and engage you in the discussion, to force you to do your own research, fathers of daughters, because we need to be doing our own research, right? And so many of these YouTube channels that are out there today they're just trash when it comes to information. Most of a lot of YouTube channels, not most of them, but a lot of YouTube channels are reaction video channels where they react to whatever they're reacting to, but they're not very informative. And I'm just a human being. I'm about solutions, particularly when we're dealing with fathers of daughters, grow dads, because we need answers. We don't need foolishness. We don't need nonsense. We don't need opinions of YouTubers who don't do the proper research, who don't have the background in which information they're giving, and they don't cross-check anything. So be very careful of what you're watching, who you're watching, and why you're watching. And be very selective in who you follow. Because at the end of the day, the research is going to fall on you. Like I said, when you come across my YouTube channel, I'm one source of education and information through instruction. Okay? But I'm on point as well, because I fall back on my life experience of raising 4 adult daughters and my professional experience of 30 years, 20 of them working in the criminal justice system and 10 years working in K-12 education. So I'm well-rounded. I'm not just some dude on YouTube giving an opinion. Everything I'm doing is going to be factually based, from personal experience as well as professional experience. Not some dude just showing up and saying, hey, I have an idea. Let me start a YouTube channel for fathers of daughters and see where it goes. No, you need answers. You need facts. And this is why I'm here, fathers. So this particular live stream was definitely, all my live streams are good, and I enjoy the research, but I really enjoyed this one, particularly talking about the adolescent brain, because most parents just they don't know. They just don't. So like I said, this is just one video. Now you can go do your own research and go a lot deeper than what I went today. But, there's always a start. There's always a starting point. So, okay, fathers, another live stream. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It was a good one. Appreciate you. Kiss them babies. Love them babies. Tell them you love them. Show them you love them. Hug them. All right? Okay, fathers, I live stream once a week. And I'll be back for another live stream next week. And I'm continuing to grind, building my channel organically, and loving everything I'm learning. And like I said, this is my way of giving back to all fathers. So I'm glad that I'm in the position to do what I'm doing. It's a blessing. It truly is a blessing, fathers. Okay? All right, mis amigos. Hasta la próxima semana. Paz. Adios. Okay, fathers, this is Ephraim B. Martin. It's been my pleasure. Till next week, I'm out. Peace.